The moment arrived without warning. The new VP stepped into the conference room with the confidence of someone who believed they already understood everything. She glanced at the figures on the screen, then at me, and released a single sentence meant to sound playful. It was the kind of remark people pretend to laugh at because the room expects it. Yet the tone carried something sharper. It questioned why the company was paying me what it did, as if my salary were an unnecessary luxury rather than a reflection of years of contribution. Conversation stopped instantly. Chairs shifted. A few people lowered their eyes as if the carpet had suddenly become fascinating. No one stepped in. No one added context. The VP smiled, satisfied, unaware that her comment had just redrawn the hierarchy in a single moment. I felt the temperature change even though the air conditioning had not moved. What struck me most was not the remark itself, but the behavior that followed. A senior director cleared his throat only to say nothing. A project manager folded her notebook and pretended she needed to check a message. It was the kind of silence that does not ask for explanation. It delivers its own verdict. In that instant, I understood the shift. My work had always been measured by outcomes, stability, and the invisible corrections that kept entire departments functioning. Now it was being weighed as a number on a spreadsheet held by someone who did not know what the number protected. Professionals over 50 know this moment well. The decision is usually made long before it is spoken. The comment simply reveals it. The weeks that followed revealed the shift more clearly than any announcement could. Nothing dramatic happened at first. My title remained the same and my responsibilities were still listed on paper. Yet the texture of my days changed one small decision at a time. Meetings that once required my presence continued without warning. Files I usually reviewed were sent directly to younger managers who suddenly carried an air of urgency, as if speed could replace understanding. Conversations that used to last 15 minutes ended after 2. People who once sought clarification now avoided asking for guidance. They preferred to appear autonomous rather than risk being associated with someone the new leadership viewed as expendable. It was not hostility. It was quiet distancing, the kind seasoned professionals recognize instantly because it is rarely reversed. A new vocabulary spread through the corridors. Words like optimization and alignment echoed in presentations, as if repeating them could compensate for the absence of experience. The most ironic change was the way restructuring became a solution for every challenge. When a problem surfaced, the instinct was to reorganize rather than examine the decisions that created it. I watched this pattern grow and realized I was observing a culture that was beginning to forget its own foundations. No one addressed me directly. There were no accusations or conflicts. Instead, my expertise was simply not requested. The institutional memory I had built over years was treated like an outdated archive that no one bothered to open. I remained present in the building, but the organization had quietly decided it no longer needed what I carried. Anyone over 50 knows this moment. It is the point where presence becomes symbolic and respect leaves without making a sound. I mentioned the clause during a routine discussion that should have taken less than 5 minutes. It was not a warning. It was simply part of the contract I had negotiated years earlier when the company still understood the value of protecting continuity. I brought it up as naturally as one would mention an insurance policy. It existed to prevent disruptions that could damage long-term partnerships, and everyone who had been in leadership at the time knew why it had been included. Legal acknowledged it with polite interest, though no one asked for the full context. They promised to review it and moved on to other topics. Their reaction reminded me of people who hear a fire alarm test and assume it belongs to another floor. The VP listened without concern. She smiled in a way that suggested she had already decided it was irrelevant. In her view, anything created before her arrival belonged to a past she had no reason to study. Days passed and no follow-up came. The silence told me everything. The new leadership believed the future was theirs to rewrite, and anything anchored in the company's history could be brushed aside. I did not insist. Professionals over 50 understand that repeating a fact does not increase its importance to those who refuse to read. What created the tension was not the clause itself, but the confidence with which it was dismissed. It revealed an assumption that structure would bend simply because someone preferred convenience over comprehension. I watched the process unfold and realized the company had just stepped past a boundary it did not know existed. The restructuring began with a cheerful announcement from leadership, presented as an exciting evolution rather than a correction. Charts appeared with new reporting lines and revised responsibilities. My role looked familiar on paper, yet several core functions had quietly been reassigned. No one asked for my assessment. No one requested a transition plan. The decisions were already locked in, shaped by people who believed organizational history could be replaced by confidence. Teams were shifted overnight. Individuals with limited understanding of the systems were given authority because they presented well in meetings. They spoke with certainty, even when their explanations skimmed the surface of what those systems actually held. I watched them navigate complex structures as if they were renovating a house without checking the foundation. They connected new pieces, removed old ones, and assumed stability would follow simply because the design looked modern. There was no confrontation from my side. It would have changed nothing. The process moved forward with the momentum of a company eager to prove it could operate more efficiently. Each adjustment created small ripples that leadership interpreted as signs of progress. They celebrated speed and missed the subtle disturbances that indicated deeper imbalances. Professionals with long careers understand this pattern. Restructuring is not dangerous when it is bold. It becomes dangerous when it is uninformed. Leadership believed they were trimming unnecessary expense. In reality, they were removing a stabilizing force that had absorbed countless problems before they reached their desks. As the new structure settled into place, I realized the point of no return had already passed. The organization had mistaken visibility for competence and had unknowingly exposed itself to consequences it was not prepared to manage. When the moment arrived to step away, it did not feel dramatic. There was no confrontation, no raised voice, no final attempt to argue for recognition. I prepared my transition with the precision of someone who has learned that clarity is more powerful than emotion. Every document was updated. Every process was written clearly. Every file was placed where the next person could find it. The work was completed so thoroughly that no one could claim disruption. It was the kind of exit that leaves no debris. I informed leadership with a short message that simply confirmed my departure date. There was no explanation. There was no appeal for reconsideration. The VP responded with polite enthusiasm, confident that the structure she had created would carry the company forward without hesitation. She thanked me for my service in a tone that suggested the chapter was already closed. Yet the room felt unusually still when the announcement was shared. Colleagues reacted with a mix of surprise and quiet understanding. A few approached me privately, not with questions, but with a look that suggested they sensed something larger beneath the surface. People who have spent decades in their careers recognize a meaningful shift when they see one. They knew I was not leaving in frustration. I was leaving because the organization no longer understood the role I played. I walked out carrying nothing more than a folder with personal notes. No scene. No farewell speech. Just a simple exit through the same doors I had entered countless times before. For those who noticed, the silence carried its own weight. Professionals over 50 understand this truth well. The most significant departures are often the quietest, and they rarely end where others assume. The first night after my departure felt ordinary to everyone inside the building. The lights dimmed on schedule, the servers hummed in their usual rhythm, and automated reports continued to generate without interruption. Nothing suggested that a fault line had already begun to open beneath the surface. Yet systems rarely break loudly. They break in the small spaces no one watches, the ones that depend on knowledge that is never written down because only experience knows where it lives. One of our long-term partners submitted a routine request just before midnight. It was the type of action that usually triggered a series of checks designed to prevent contractual complications. Those checks existed because of the clause no one had reviewed carefully. Without my presence, and without the continuity protections I had once managed, the system followed the new configuration without hesitation. It treated the request not as a safeguard, but as permission to execute a process that leadership had never learned to interpret. The automated sequence launched exactly as it had been built to respond in the absence of confirmation. It did not pause. It did not ask for human judgment. It followed the logic that remained after the restructuring had removed the deeper context. In a few minutes, a chain of actions unfolded that could not be reversed. The partner noticed immediately and reacted with urgency, sending inquiries that reached executives before sunrise. Inside the company, no one understood the significance of the message at first. They saw an unexpected alert and assumed it was a technical irregularity that would resolve itself. What they had not yet realized was that the night had revealed the first visible crack created by decisions made without listening. Morning arrived with an unusual weight. Before most employees reached their desks, leadership had already gathered in a room that was normally reserved for celebrations and investor briefings. The partners' alert from the night before had been escalated through every level of oversight. What began as a simple inquiry evolved into a full review of the automated sequence that had executed without human confirmation. Once the financial impact was calculated, the room fell into a silence that felt almost physical. The number appeared on the screen without decoration. It was not presented through emotional commentary. It was displayed as a factual consequence of contractual misalignment and procedural neglect. 1.3 billion. The figure stood alone, untouched by interpretation. It was not a projection or a negotiation. It was the quantifiable cost of a system operating without the memory that once stabilized it. Emergency meetings followed with increasing urgency. Teams that had never interacted were suddenly asked to repair what they did not create. Legal reframed the situation as a misunderstanding while attempting to slow the partners' escalation. Finance drafted explanations that avoided acknowledging the decisions that had led to the malfunction. Communications prepared statements designed to reassure internal teams without admitting structural weakness. Throughout the building, people whispered in hallways but avoided naming the real source of the damage. No one repeated the comment the VP had made weeks earlier. The sentence that once belittled my value no longer fit the narrative. It had been erased by the magnitude of the loss. The silence that filled the offices did more than expose the failure. It revealed the truth professionals over 50 understand well. The cost of ignoring experience rarely appears immediately. It arrives the morning after, and it arrives without mercy. If you are watching this and you are over 50, hear this with clarity. The events I described were never about retaliation or pride. They were about structure. They were about the quiet architecture that holds an organization together long before anyone notices its absence. Experience does not announce itself. It simply carries weight until someone decides that weight no longer matters. When that decision is made by people who have not lived the consequences of their choices, the results are rarely delayed for long. You already understand this truth. Years in any profession teach you that stability is not created by slogans or colorful charts. It is created by the judgment that forms after decades of solving problems other people never see. That judgment is not loud. It is not decorative. It is the reason systems survive unexpected pressure. When leaders confuse visibility with intelligence, they remove precisely what keeps risk from becoming loss. If you have ever been dismissed as outdated or unnecessary, remember what happened in this story. Remember how quickly confidence collapsed once the foundation was removed. Organizations often miscalculate the difference between expense and value. Salary becomes the focus, while dependency remains invisible until it ruptures. By the time they recognize the imbalance, the damage has already accumulated. Take this as a reminder to protect your knowledge and remain steady in your standards. Do not argue with anyone who refuses to read. Do not lower your worth for the comfort of those who do not understand what you carry. Your experience is not ornamental. It is structural. When they say you cost too much, they are often admitting they never understood what was holding the system together.